Hi everyone, my name is Zach, and in this video we will add the finer details to the saddle. That means we will create a new brush for the stitching, and we will use the curve and line stroke method a lot to add lines and the stitching to the saddle. Also, I will show you a way to add details all over an object with the displace modifier and a procedural texture. This, for example, we will use for the clothing under the saddle and for the scales. All the stuff you will learn in this video we will also use in the next video for the luggage. Alright, just one little note here, maybe I mixed up the terms seams and stitching because it's somehow hard to understand for me what is what. But anyway, I guess you know what I mean, so let's get started. I open up my scales brush file, simply move the camera to the second layer, and here I add a torus. Set this to smooth shading, rotate this a bit, and move this down. Then let's select the camera. Now let's go to the world settings and enable the start and end point of the mist. Maybe let's add a subsurf modifier to this. Now let's rotate this and hit F12 to render this. And if we take the viewer node output here, we have our final brush. Maybe we can go over to the node editor and change this a bit because we don't need that hard edge. Now let's go over to the UV image editor and save this image with the name Seam Brush. So now let's go back. Where's the saddle? Selected. Switch to sculpt mode and let's select the standard sculpt draw brush. Duplicate this, call this seam, and under texture let's add a new one. And open the seam brush. So now basically we can draw this seam on the surface, but certainly we have to adjust the brush a bit. Let's set this to area plane. Rake is very important in this case because we want this to move in our direction. And pretty important, we need to increase the spacing. So, and this way we can add these seams. Also in this case I would lock this. That means if we change the distance to the saddle, the brush will stay in the same size related to the saddle. So, but you can see the resolution is pretty low here. So let's check out if we flood fill this and smooth this, so we also get some nicer results here, I guess. Let's go back to the sculpt mode. So, and as you can see, the resolution is still not high enough. And in this case, when we add these seams, I would enable dynamic topology and increase this to maybe 300. Let's check. Still not nice. Yeah, and if I put it up to 600, maybe not too high. Maybe 500 is okay. I don't think we will view this that close. You can see we can add this nice shapes. So certainly the curve I set to a smooth curve. And as you can see, then we can simply add this seams pretty quick. Since we don't want to view this in super close-ups, I think it's nice to make this a bit bigger so we can also see it from the distance. So now let's undo all these testing things. Now let's simply take the clay stripes brush. So now I just want to sharpen some of these edges using the crease brush, the clay stripes brush, and also the pinch brush. So now let's add something like this here, simply using the crease brush, or in this case a sharp crease brush. And yeah, let's just add a few other creases so this looks a little bit more interesting. For this we can also use the line stroke. And back here, let's use the curve. So curve, control, left click to draw the curve. Then I hit enter, maybe decrease the size of the crease. And in this way, I can also add this curve here. Alright, and what we also can try is to take this along these edges here. I think this will also add to the details. Up here we have a very low resolution, so let's enable dynamic topology with 200 resolution. Here let's use the curve again. Let's delete this curve here and let's create a new one. So, and now let's use our seam brush. Increase this to 500. Make this a bit bigger. I think 400 will also do the job in our case. And the nice thing is here you also can use the curve, for example, or the line. So if I draw this around here, hit enter, you can see how this will create the seams, or I use the line. So I think this is enough, and you can see just a few lines and this seams add so much detail to this thing. Also, if we like, we can use our destruction brush, decrease the strength. In this case, I disable dynamic topology and also symmetry. So we can add a few of these details here and there, and then the whole thing looks again much more detailed. So now let's adjust these two things, because now they are looking a little bit boring and not really fitting to the rest here. And also we have to change this area in the front here. Let's rotate the saddle a bit. Something like this. Move it up a bit so that you can clearly see the straight line here. Also we can quickly switch over to the sculpt mode, use a grab brush and move this area a bit down. So this thing here, I will apply all the modifiers. So I use the Sculpt Tools add-on Apply Mods. And then let's just add some lines and some seams like on the saddle here. And the same thing we will do down here on this thing. So right now I just wondered, why is my stroke doing nothing here? And that's because I have the curve stroke method still enabled. Let's switch back to space. And now with the sharp grease brush with a very low strength, we can add this scratches here and there. And maybe this scratches we can also add to the saddle. And here it's important that you enable this pressure sensitivity for the radius, so you have a nice transition from bigger to a more pointy end. Okay, now we want to add some details to this claw thing here, so let's select it. And here we will use a simple modifier to add some details, but before let's adjust the folds. So mainly that means we have to add some folds where the saddle is interacting with this clothing here. So now I will quickly add a modifier, and I'm talking about the displace modifier. Let's hit new to create a new texture. Let's call this details cloth. Click on this button here, and let's add a simple clouds texture. Let's decrease the size and also the strength of this modifier to see what's going on here. And this should be just a very saddle effect. And yeah, as you can see, this really helps to give this clothing a bit more details. And I would use the same trick for the scales, because the scales, if you put it to the high resolution, they have not that much details. So let's also add a displace modifier. Let's call it detail scales. Let's reduce the strength already. And in this case, let's take the Voronoi texture. And also let's reduce the size. So, and certainly right now we can't really see the details because we have to enable the multi-resolution modifier. Okay, now we can see the effect. It's already looking pretty interesting, but let's increase the size a bit. And let's increase the strength. So, and in this way we can add quickly a lot of details to the whole thing, in this case the scales. Alright guys, that easy we can add a lot of more details to our creature and the saddle by just adding the stitching / seams and this procedural details all over the scales, for example.